Megan, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Lupe, it's so nice to be here. Thank you for
Oh,
having me.
so I like to start every podcast interview by asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
So, when I was really young, we played Monopoly and I loved playing Monopoly. So, I wanted to be a business lady. I didn't know what that meant at all, but I knew I wanted to like wear high-heeled
Oh,
shoes and have the skirt with the suit and maybe be a banker because in Monopoly there's somebody that tends the bank.
yes.
And obviously, as a kid, I would go to the bank with my parents. So that really from a very young age is something that was very clear that that's what I wanted to do. But I really, again, had no idea what a business lady was.
Can you tell us what you do today and how you think that connects to being a banker?
Sure. So today I do work with money and I work
Mm,
with individuals and their money and helping
mm,
them put a plan in place for their money because money really touches every facet of our lives. So if we have a plan for it, it really can kind of help make life go much more smoothly. And I came to this after working for about 2 decades in
mm,
the investment management industry.
mm,
So I live in Boston and asset management firms abound here. So
mm,
right after college, I joined an asset management company here in Boston, and I worked there for almost 2 decades, worked in that industry, and I helped institutions with their money. So helping
mm,
them explain how was their money invested, how was their money being used to achieve the goals that they had. So clearly the goals for institutions are very different than the goals for individuals. And
mm,
part of my career was spent working on defined contribution retirement plans. And
mm,
defined contribution plans provide retirement benefits to workers at the end of their careers, but there's no guarantee on how much money would come out of the plan to
mm.
provide, right, your living for you.
Yeah.
And so what I found is that most people were really under investing in those
Mm,
defined contribution plans. And
mm,
so I downshifted a little bit from working with institutions to, working, becoming a solopreneur, working for myself and working kind of one-on-one with folks who are invested in 401k and defined contribution plans on their own, but who need help to kind of help them see the big picture and get to that end goal with enough money.
mm. And how did you know that that's what you wanted to do? What made you realize that you wanted to make that shift?
One reason that I knew I wanted to make that shift was that I had questions about managing my own family's finances.
Mm,
My husband and I would go back and forth and be talking about things that affected our daily finances, such as should we have an emergency fund? How much should be in the emergency fund? And this is kind of when we were first married and even after we had children. How much insurance should we have? Did we have the right coverage? These were questions that we had. And even though I was working in the investment space, I really didn't have the answers. And so I realized if I didn't have the answers, it's likely
mm,
that other people wouldn't have those answers. And it's something that I'm really interested in. But if you're not interested in it, kind of tracking down all the research and putting a plan in place is really hard because there's a lot of competing and conflicting information online. And if that's not what interests you and excites you, it's not something that you might want to spend your time on. So I realized there was really a need for this, and it's been really rewarding.
mm,
I guess I will say from a
mm,
personal standpoint too, money was a source of stress in my house when I was growing up.
mm,
And a big part of that was because my grandparents hadn't saved anything for retirement. And so my parents were trying to support them while also supporting the five of us. And it was just a source of stress. So I always knew from a very young age that I wanted to have my retirement completely set. I knew that that was super
mm,
important, but I didn't have guidance on things like debt, risk managers, like insurance. I just didn't have the answers on that. So, really, after I shifted from working in a corporate setting, before I started this, I really got our own family finances in control and really optimized. And it's brought such peace to our life. We have a
mm,
great sense of where we're going. It just has taken away a lot of uncertainty.
mm. I love that you use the word peace. It had a calming effect on me. I'm one of those people that would love to know more, but it kind of intimidates me a little bit. And so I love hearing that you're passionate about that, excites you, and that you're sharing that with people now. Was that shift hard for you? Is that difficult to leave 2 decades of asset management that has like a status to it too, right? Of working in that industry. Was that difficult to shift?
Right. It really wasn't. And I
Mm,
think the reason for that is that, I have a family and my girls at that point were really young and it was a great career. It was hard to manage that and traveling with
Mm,
raising our girls.
mm,
And so we knew, my husband and I always had the idea when the girls were young, it was okay for us to be kind of crazy, both traveling and managing things. We had great support from family. And kind of essentially anybody can change a diaper, feed a bottle. But we just decided that as they got older, sometimes you might hear the expression big kids, big problems, little
mm,
kids, little problems. And we
mm.
decided that is really important to have somebody kind of more anchored in the home, still working, but dedicating more time to family than to corporate work for sure. Having that pull really made it easy.
I know there's some listeners who are in that same spot right now who are trying to figure out like whether they should make that shift, especially women. What would you say to that woman that's listening who's thinking about maybe still having a role in a job, but also prioritizing family?
Oh, I would say go for it. Go for
Mm,
it because the kids grow so fast. The time will be gone before you know it. There are things that you can do to keep yourself in touch with what is happening in your industry. There is continuing education, there's free college classes online, and it just gives you the ability to kind of keep yourself current and
mm,
have an outlet for getting those kudos at work. I mean, that's, I think, one thing when you step back fully and you were used to having accomplishing projects and really getting things done and traveling and being important and having people call you and email you and need you your attention. So it's hard to kind of step back from that sometimes,
mm,
but it's absolutely worth it. And I think, especially as a woman, I love that my girls have seen me have a career and work.
mm, mm. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Megan. I think that's going to be very helpful. It's helpful for me as I think about the shift that I've made in my career. Right before we hit record, you were talking a little bit about having a plan and why that's so important and making it easy. Do you mind talking about all of that and the importance of it?
Absolutely. So I think the most important reason to have a plan for your money, in addition to peace and some of the intangible feelings that we get from being in control and having confidence, but having a plan for our money and seeing our money clearly really helps us make optimal decisions around our money. And I think so many of us, and myself included, I mean, I've got a long list of suboptimal decisions that I've made with my money and that I've experienced other people
Mm,
making with their money.
hmm
Things like using the entire paycheck for today's living rather than saving for retirement, not having risk managers in place like life insurance. We all have car insurance because that's required, but nobody really sits down and talks to us and says, oh, you got to make sure that you've got life insurance if you have children and you have other people dependent on your income. And when you're busy and you're working full time, and maybe you're a part of a couple and both of you are working full time, these things are just, they just fall by the wayside because they're not required.
Mm. Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure. My husband loves this kind of stuff. He loves learning, but I don't really understand it. And I'm embarrassed to even admit that, but it's true.
no, but most people don't. And it's okay if you don't understand it,
Mm,
as long as, like you said, your husband,
mm,
he enjoys that and he's diving in and
mhm.
he's getting it figured out for your family. And if you are married to someone who doesn't, if neither one of you is passionate about that, there's other help you can get from other sources. And the important thing is just to identify that's something that you might need and to move forward with it. And I think
Mm,
some of the other things like social media is good in so many ways. We wouldn't be connected, right,
mhm,
if we didn't have that capability. But in some respects, now rather than keeping up with the Joneses in your own town, we're
mm,
keeping up with the Joneses on a worldwide scale. And
mm,
that can be really daunting. And it can lead us to make decisions again that are suboptimal because we're kind of taking our cues from how other
mm,
people are spending their money
mm.
in terms of what should we do with our money.
And then we don't understand fully other people's situation. We don't know all the behind the scenes. And
That's
so
right.
we're comparing ourselves to what we think is going on, but we don't know. And so there could be a lot of debt there. There could be trust fund there. We're trying to compare ourselves and keep up with something. We don't know the whole picture.
It's so true. And I think that's why having a plan that's unique to you and your family makes so
Mm,
much sense because it really helps you keep blinders on in a way, in that you're not going, you might look at all that, but you're not going to get distracted by it or change the course that you've charted for your
Mm,
family based on what you see online or what other people may be doing.
mm. And when you say come up with a plan, what does that look like for people? What does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So a plan might feel really intimidating. And
Mm,
maybe if you worked with a financial advisor or financial planner, their idea of a plan is really, really detailed and complex. And there is absolutely a place for that. That's really
mm,
important to have. But we can all put plans in place for ourselves without working with a financial advisor. Or if you
mm,
want to work with one, that's good too. But I mean, generally, the
mhm,
basics of a money plan would be goals,
mm.
short, medium, and long-term goals, and have them be as specific as possible.
And so what are some examples of that that you've seen
Yeah.
for people?
Yeah. So for some folks, a goal is to pay a certain percentage of their kids' college expense in whatever, however many years away from college they are.
Mm,
It can be things such as take an annual vacation, buy a replacement car in 5 years. Some people are interested in leaving a financial legacy for their children or grandchildren. A lot of people do have a number in terms of retirement, retire by a specific age. So, in addition to having kind of goals that are going to keep you on track, guiding principles to live by are also really, really important.
mm,
And these guiding principles would help you make decisions on a daily basis. And these are things like making sure that you're spending less than you earn,
mm,
that you have an emergency fund in place. I should say, these are my guiding principles.
mm, mm,
Not using debt or paying off debt if you have it. Keeping wealth building really simple. You can use your 401k plan at work, other retirement plan. You can save within mutual funds and savings accounts. And of course, real estate, just a primary home, is a great wealth building tool. And
mm,
then finally, the last guiding principle would be about making sure that you've got those risk managers or wealth protectors in place.
mm.
Things like insurance, getting estate plans in place. That's one area where I find a lot of people don't have that ticked off because, again, it's not mandatory, it's not required moving forward in life. But again, something really important, because without that, then the state where you reside makes all those decisions for you.
Hmm. Yeah. Going back to the goals, when you talked about the college, my daughter's 3 and my son's about to be 8 months. Seems so far away. And I bet that's what a lot of people are thinking, like, oh, well, college is so far away. Maybe I'll start thinking about it in a few years. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so it's far away, and it's also, Lupe, you don't know how much it's going to cost because there's
Mm,
such inflation on the tuition front.
mm,
So what I would say is use automation to your benefit here.
mm,
Decide a specific amount of money that you want to set aside on a monthly basis, and just have that investment made automatically from your checking account, and just get started. You will never regret having money available for the
mm.
kids to use for college education, for trade school, or then if they decide maybe they don't want to go to college, the money can be taken out of college savings accounts. There is a penalty, but it can be taken out and used for anything else.
So you would recommend putting it into one of those accounts that are specific for call, like I think it's 529.
That's right. I would
Uh,
highly recommend a 529 because there are really great tax advantages when the
mm,
money is used specifically to pay for tuition and room and board.
gotcha. And then if my daughter decides not to go to college because that's just not what she wants to do, let's say, the penalty, do the rewards of having put it in outweigh the penalty?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
like,
no, it's just you're going to have to pay a tax
gotcha.
on it. Whereas when the money comes out and is used to pay for qualified educational expenses,
Mm,
there's no tax on it. It comes out tax free. It's really
mm,
great. The money goes in after tax,
and then
and
it
then it
gets to grow.
grows,
Gotcha.
and it comes out after tax when it's used for qualified educational expenses.
Mm. And I love that you said you will never regret doing that, putting that in.
That's right, because that really helps set up the next generation,
Mm,
right? I mean, what I'm really thinking about, because the way that I would say my family history has gone is that, my grandparents really had nothing. My
mm,
dad really tried to improve upon that with what he did. And
mm,
now I need to improve upon that with what I'm doing. And I want to try to set
mm,
up my girls in the right way so that when they're coming out of high school, that they've got choices and options. And that when they're coming out of college, they have choices and options. So many people, unfortunately, are saddled with student loan debt, and that
Mm.
really narrows down the choices and options that they have. So, to anything that we can do to put our children in a really great position is, I think, a really good thing.
Thank you for mentioning your grandparents. That actually makes me think of my parents. I know this is maybe a culture thing too. What would you say to someone who's also probably going to be taking care of their kids, but also probably their aging parents? And we're already starting to wonder, my parents starting to age, starting to think about their retirement. How are me and my husband going to help them financially? And it's a very real thing for us to think about. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. So I think that number one is to know that many people are in that situation. I always
Mm,
felt really bad about it growing up. I knew about it and was aware of this situation, and that made me feel bad. And then when I started working in the investment space and specifically with 401k and defined contribution plans, I realized that most people or many people are in this position. So
mm,
that's kind of one thing, is to know that it's okay. And they may just not have known or had the ability to kind of slot money aside. And so it's okay. But for you and your husband, that's a great catalyst for wanting to kind of be able to see all of your finances clearly and
mm,
have a plan in place and know that that's going to be something that you're going to want to do. And so there's a couple of different ways you could approach it. You could take a lump sum now and put it in a specific account. You could let that grow. And then when the time comes, money could be deducted from that to help pay for living expenses. And that'd be great to be in that position to be able to kind of put a lump sum aside today. Or you could say that as the time comes and you're having that conversation with your parents, that's a great reason to have a monthly budget and to understand this would obviously be a high value item for you because it's something you really want to do. And it's an important place to spend your hard earned money. And then you could just see within the context of your cash flow, this is how much you can set aside. And it may be that you may be able to set aside a different amount of money that your sisters may be able to. If you can have the conversation with them, or when they want to have the conversation with you, I think the most important thing is not to bring any accusations
mm,
around it, just to really try to be very neutral and say, this is the situation we're in. This is what we can do to help and
mm.
support.
So coming up again with the plan on how me, my husband, my sisters want to set aside money, how much, and put in it. And I guess with kids, it's like, okay, 529, I've heard of that. So you would recommend putting it into like a regular account, do you think? Like a
So
regular,
for like something for your parents,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think depending on when you think they may need to draw upon it, could put it into a mutual fund if it was something longer term out. If it's something that's more near term, like within 3 years or 5 years, you think that they would need to draw on that, you would put it into just a savings account or a money market account, which is not going to earn a great amount of money, but at
Mm,
least it's always going to be there and it won't fluctuate with whatever is happening in the markets.
gotcha. Gotcha.
I
Well,
think
thank
for them, you could talk to them about just sitting down and saying what might be coming in as you approach retirement, what money might be coming in, and then figure out what is the gap compared to what might be coming in when they retire as compared to what their living expenses look like and
mm,
might look like in retirement. So then you understand what that gap is. And you obviously try to calculate that on a monthly basis. And then you can figure out where you and your sisters can help fill that gap.
mhm,
The next thing on the list is understanding the money mindset of
mm.
you and your partner. Now you'll be invited into knowing what is the money mindset of your sisters. And even though you may be really close, money is so personal that you may not really have a complete sense of what their money mindset is.
And when you say money mindset, what do you mean? What does that look like for people?
So I think it's kind of, how do you view money? How was money talked about and experienced in your home? Growing up, I feel like it really does plays a big role in how we think about money today. Some people think that, oh, money is terrible and we shouldn't try to grow wealth. So you'd want to get an understanding of what's their perspective on money, what's their money backstory. Sometimes people have a mindset like, I can make money no matter what. It doesn't matter what situation I'm in. And then other people have more of a scarcity mindset that this is all I've got and I've really got to protect it.
So what do you do as you're working with clients and you notice someone has like a scarcity mindset? I see this come up in client conversations and coaching. Growing up for us, it was like money, you have to work really hard for money. That was kind of like the message growing up. So what do you do when you observe that
Yeah,
in,
I
in
think I just
clients?
want to say too, Lupe, so that was one of the key takeaways of my childhood, is that
Mm,
you work hard for money. And I actually really appreciate that I have that
mm,
mindset that
mm,
equates work with money. And I think
Mm.
that's like a really good thing. You can't be faulted for hard work. So you try to get, when there is a client that you can kind of see that, it really depends. Or if it's a couple, which is typically who I'm working with, they both coming from the same places, one coming from scarcity, one's coming more from abundance.
Mm.
Really just asking questions, because there are a lot of times you can see things more clearly when you're being asked questions.
Mm. Mhm.
Right. So then you're asking questions. So then all of a sudden the person starts realizing, okay, so now I see this a little bit better.
Mm. What kind of question? So what would be an example of a question you might ask?
So it just really kind of a question that asks, think in their heads and actually tell you out loud what they're thinking. So
Mm.
anything that's more like, tell me more about that. What makes you see money in this way?
Mm.
Have you had an experience in the past that led you
Mm.
to this belief? Any of those open-ended questions to get the person talking a little bit more.
Mm. That's very coach-like, Megan.
Well,
Because
that's
that's
good.
part of the coaching. What we do, we don't ask why, we ask what, how, tell me more. It gets people to open up and explore what they're thinking and dig deep. Like when in coaching, we're encouraged not to ask like why, because people tend to get defensive. Why did you do
Yes,
that? More like, what about that is important to you?
it's so
It's a
true.
shift.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true.
And what have you learned as you've explored those things with clients?
So I think for me, like at the very beginning, I realized that I had a lot of anxiety, I would say, when I was much younger about
Mm.
money,
Mm.
but much more confidence as I got into the working world. This is a topic that can be anxiety producing.
Mm.
The number one takeaway that I have from working with clients is that the level of anxiety comes way down when
Mm.
people can see their money, not just their income coming in and their expenses, but kind of see their personal finances as a whole.
Mm.
And when they have a plan,
Mm.
then they've like, okay, I've got my marching orders. Most people know what their goals are.
Mm.
They just don't know how are they going to get from here to there. And when there is a plan in place, it just makes it so much easier. And my husband and I operated without like a real plan for a very long time. And it just getting our, like, so we basically got our plan in place in about 2017 when I really, really stepped back
Mm.
from working. We just took it on a leap that, okay, could we live on one salary? I had not run the numbers in advance. We just did the leap of faith and said, okay, yeah. And then as I had time, I started organizing everything in my house. And then I thought, I've got to organize my money. Like, I want to really dig into this and figure this out. And I've never looked back. I mean, once we got our plan in place and we've got our systems that help us measure our progress, systems that help keep us on track with the goals. Once we had those in place, it's just, okay, this is how we're living life. It's very calming. The one regret we have is that we didn't get this in place when we were first married.
Mm.
But you know what? We've got it in place now and we'll benefit from it going forward. But that's the one thing I would really encourage is just try to get a plan in place, whether you do it yourself with kind of some of these things that these ideas that I've given you, or work with a financial planner or work with a financial coach. A lot of people think, oh, I can't work with a financial planner because I don't have any assets, or I have money saved, but it's at work in my 401k plan.
Mm.
And there are financial planners who will do a standalone plan for you without the expectation of managing any of your assets.
Mm.
And a financial coach like me also would do the same thing without any expectation that you'd be managing assets. So it's available and it's out there if people don't feel well qualified to do it themselves.
Mm. As you're saying that, I'm getting a little bit of anxiety because I'm thinking, me and my husband would do okay. But at the thought of like, oh, sharing all our information, we're going to be judged about how much we spend on food or how much we spend on DoorDash. I'm just thinking about like silly things. And I'm sure that's probably what's going through the mind of some people who are listening today, where like, oh, I'd love to work with Megan or with a financial coach or a financial planner, but like this concept of let me clean before the housekeeper comes because I don't want her to judge me for having the house too dirty. Same thing. What would you say to that person listening to me who's thinking, oh man, I don't want to be judged?
So that is the number one comment I get before meetings. So people will sign up for their meeting, they'll be excited for it, they'll get the prep. And then as the meeting draws closer, they say, I don't know, I do spend a lot of money in this category. People are absolutely afraid of being judged. And that is one thing, I bring no judgment to it.
Mm.
I will never tell anybody to stop spending money in a particular
Mm.
category. because I feel like we're all in a season of life. And so for you right now, you've got two young children, two children under the age of 3. DoorDash is a very valuable spend in your life. I had another friend who does a lot of the online shopping at the grocery stores and at Target. And she kind of thought, oh gosh, but you know what? That was really beneficial to her because,
Mm.
again, working full time, 2 young children, really kind of primary caregiver for these children.
Mhm.
And she's someone who would tends to overspend. And so I said, look,
Mm.
if you're doing everything online in advance, you're not in the store to kind of pick up
Mm.
that impulse item. There's a way to arrange your cash flow so that you can spend on the things that you value, and then you just peel back from the things that you don't value.
Mm. Mm.
And it's really important, as you pointed out, to find a coach or a financial planner or someone who is non-judgmental.
Mm. The other thing that came up for me, I know I have like a great support team and I coach on this all the time of like asking for help. And so I have a gardener who helps us with our landscaping, a housekeeper who helps us with our home, great doctors. But the things that I'm afraid to look at, me for myself, my husband likes this stuff, but the money I tend to kind of avoid. And I bet that's a lot of people too. I see this with health stuff too, like hiring a trainer or a nutritionist. That's kind of the things we kind of put off. I can do it by myself. I'll do it on my own because really we're kind of procrastinating because I know for me, I don't want to look.
Yeah. And so I do have clients who, when they sign up for their meeting, it's the first time in months that they've looked at their spending accounts, that they've
Mm.
looked at their asset and debt accounts.
Mm.
So you are not alone. Many people feel anxiety. And I used to actually feel anxiety when our credit card bill would come in. And this was back in the day when it would be mailed to your home. You know, I would feel
Yeah.
I would feel anxiety 3 times over on a purchase, right? When I made
Mm.
the purchase itself, when I had to open the statement, and
Mm.
then when I had to pay the bill. And I just
Mm.
realized, why am I just having anxiety about this 3 times over? So now I handle things very differently. We don't put much on credit cards. We do it all on debit cards. I can see the transactions on a regular basis. But I think with the procrastination, you know, at some point you'll have to know these numbers and take a look. And I think when you realize that taking control gives you power, and
Mm.
the knowledge that your husband had is in his head about the money and his ideas and visions for the future would only be enhanced with what's in your head when you kind of see everything. Two of you working together would be even more powerful than him just working alone, even though I'm sure he's highly qualified to do it.
Yeah. Well, one of my fears, one of the things that causes me anxiety is thinking, what if something happens to my husband and I'm not prepared? And I beat myself up about that. I have an accounting degree. I have a good background. I don't look, and I'm even embarrassed to share this. But one of my worries is that something will happen to him. And then he always tells me, you'll figure it out if something were to happen to me. You're smart. But that does cause me anxiety. And I think I remember hearing something like, since we as women tend to outlive our husbands,
Right.
we're the ones that going to be dealing with if we didn't save enough for retirement, with the consequences of that, because we do tend to outlive men and we are likely to outlive our partners.
It's so true. Yeah, yeah. Women have, I think, a 3 to 4 year life expectancy beyond, and that's on average compared to men. So that's something that's very real. And I think just in general, both men and women are living longer than expected. And so while you might say, well, that's really a blessing to live longer than expected, it puts you in a very difficult position if you haven't prepared well for retirement.
Mhm.
Because there's that many more years over which your nest egg has to
Right.
last. But I do think sometimes it's like the monster under the bed. Sometimes the not looking and the
Mm.
is worse than the
Yeah.
actual situation. Whereas, and for you, because it's not something you enjoy doing, you could have your husband doing a lot of the day to day, and you could just set up a time to talk, put something in the calendar several times a year. So, like, my
Mm.
husband and I meet and look at our cash flow and all of our stuff on a monthly basis, but that might be too frequent for you. You might want to do that every 3 months or every six
Mm.
months.
And I'm curious, Megan, what does that look like for you and your husband? I'm so curious to hear about a couple
Yeah.
who does this well and consistently. Do you meet on a Sunday? Do you meet over coffee? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So usually we're just at home, and oftentimes it is on the weekends, like Saturday
Mm.
or Sunday. You can have it be a lot more fun. I should probably make it more fun for him do like a wine date or a coffee
Does he
date or
enjoy this as much as you do? Or
no,
okay.
no, he really doesn't. Although I have to say, like this week, he asked to look at all the spreadsheets and everything that we go through, which really surprised me. And it made me feel really happy because usually it's me dragging him to say, okay, you know what?
Mm,
It's the month just turned. We need to just look at this. So what we do is I am the one that's kind of in the budget on a regular basis. So when we sit down to talk, we look at the month that just ended and we look and see what came in terms of income and what were the expenses and how much went into savings, because that's usually for us, that's what's left over goes into savings.
and do
For
you
some
look at on
people,
it? Do you look at it at a detailed like, oh, here were the big purchases that we made this month, or is it just like high level categories?
yeah, it's really just high level categories. Yeah. But then with the budgeting app that we use, you can actually get in and see, okay, well, for dining out, why was that so much more this month as compared to what
Mm,
it typically might be? And then you can see the actual transactions. But I try to keep everything pretty high level for him because I try to keep it to about 30 minutes. So it's
okay.
not like a
Okay.
big ask of time. So
That's kind
we
of
look at
nice though to hear that. Okay, you both don't love it. Okay, so this is doable because if he really loved it, then it was like, oh my gosh, well, that's clearly not me. But to hear that he doesn't enjoy it and he still does it, even if
yeah,
he's being
yeah.
dragged a little bit to do it, that's
He's
okay.
being dragged a little bit. I mean, he likes the fact that he knows I've got it under control. That definitely gives him peace. Because as I said before, when we were both at work and kind of running in 100 directions, it was kind of like, hey, do you have that? Are you doing taking care of that bill? Are
Mm,
you doing this or that? For me, it's great to see that he's asking for that. And so we look at the last month's budget, we look at the upcoming month's budget, figuring out are there any big expenses that we know are coming. And then we look at our spreadsheets, and the spreadsheet would include things like goals that we've got, kind of reviewing those. We look at large purchases we've made in the last year. We look at our net worth. So we look at all of our asset accounts and figure out how are they doing and how are they progressing. We don't look at it on a monthly basis, but we kind of talk about, okay, how much longer do we have on the life insurance policies? What
mm,
does that look like? A lot of it is kind of like talking about the goals and have those
mm,
shifted at all and what changes have happened that we need to kind of put into our process.
mm. Does it look any different at the beginning of the year? I know we're coming up on the beginning of, we're recording this December 1st. At the beginning of the year, I think it's a great opportunity for people. A lot of people feel motivated to look at their finances, at their health. Do you do anything different at the beginning of the year?
So we don't do anything different, but if you have listeners who are not taking control of any of these aspects of their lives, I would just totally recommend take one piece of this plan that we've talked about and just do it. The whole idea of like a fresh start. I teach classes, like adult ed classes, and we do them in January and September because those are kind of like the fresh start
Mm,
periods for people. But in terms of what we're doing, no, because we're kind of talking on a
yeah,
regular
yeah.
basis. So
Gotcha. And you mentioned systems earlier. What are some of the systems that people could adopt? Or you mentioned an app.
yeah, yeah. So essentially, like a budgeting app is a great system because that keeps you on track with one of the first guiding principles, which is to make sure that you're spending less than you earn. Most people are spending about the same amount that they earn. And so, therefore, not setting anything aside. So, 8 out of 10 families are what they would
Mm,
say living paycheck to paycheck. So, a budgeting app is a great way to just kind of see where's my money going. Then you can kind of identify what are you splurging on right now? And as you talked about earlier, it might be convenience in terms of food prep.
mm,
And for the season like that you're in, for example, that's a really good thing to be splurging on. So the budgeting app is a great thing. Then it's basically like just spreadsheets. And it can be like a Google sheet, it can be Excel, it can be anything that just kind of helps you see things clearly. And you put together like a net worth spreadsheet, a debt inventory spreadsheet. We do a spending spreadsheet, which just says to us what dates are the bills due, our general
mm.
bills, and kind of what are the basic spending categories that we are spending money on. And then what are our non-monthly bills? Because that's where people get tripped up is that our spending is both regular, but it's also irregular because, for example, your insurance may be quarterly or annually. And so you have to make sure that when that insurance bill is due, that you've already had set aside the money for the 11
Right.
months leading up to when the bill
Property
is due.
taxes.
Exactly. Right, right,
Mm,
right. And then just having something to talk about what your goal, a spreadsheet that contains what are the goals that you've got.
mm. Yeah, this is getting me excited. I'm like, okay, maybe we could do this. My husband would love to put those spreadsheets together. I would be very overwhelmed. But I think he would like to set those up and then maybe I can help manage. One of the things that I talk about in coaching is like starting really small when we're wanting to
Yes.
make a shift in our life, a long-term shift. So for financial health, what might that be? What's like a small thing that we could start right away that could kind of create that momentum for us?
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, there's so many different directions we could go in
And your
here.
face just lit up.
I know. So I think one of the things that would be most impactful and be more of a low level lift is to put a budgeting app in place.
Mm,
And like a true budgeting app, something that really is going to help you set a target for your income and that the income will be allocated. And sometimes people like to call it an income allocation plan rather than a budget because some people think a budget feels really restrictive.
hmm
And I agree, the word budget can feel restrictive, but when you put one in place and you put a plan in place for your cash flow, it really gives you such power. You really can kind of leverage what's coming
mm,
in. And in fact, most people who put a budget in place really find somewhere between $250 and $500 worth of spending that
mm.
they are already doing that they either didn't realize they were spending. Like I had one client who had 2 HBO subscriptions, right? Didn't even know that she had them. And she was,
Oh
because she
no.
wasn't reviewing the credit card
Yeah. Oh,
statement.
I'm sure we have tons of things like that.
Yeah, like that's the problem with those subscriptions.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But that would be my advice is just give that a go and get a sense of if you're underspending the income, then what can you put that money toward? Do you put it towards debt repayment if you've got debt? Can you put it towards saving for one of these goals, one of these life milestones that is supposed to be so fun and happy, and yet they often cause a lot of stress because we're not financially prepared for them.
Hmm. And what are a couple of examples of budget apps that you recommend?
So there's one called YNAB. It's YNAB. You need a budget. And again, it's like a $0 based budgeting system so that you put it in input exactly what's going to be coming in this month, and then you spend it all either on your regular expenses or it goes to savings or debt repayment. And then the other one is called Every Dollar. And again, it's a zero based budgeting app. The YNAB requires a subscription fee because what it does is it connects to your spending account. So you can connect your debit card and your credit cards to it so that those transactions are going to automatically come into the app. And all you need to do is just allocate them.
Mm-hmm.
Every Dollar has both a subscription, like a paid service, which does the same thing, which will download the bank transactions, but they also have a free version as well, or you
Mm-hmm.
don't get that bank connectivity. So it's a little bit more arduous in terms of you'd have to input your own receipts. I think it's money well spent. I think they're both about $120 a year. So it comes
Mm.
out to be about $10 a month.
And they're safe. Your transactions are safe.
Yes, so that's one of the reasons to go with either one of those is that they do have high security and they're also not reselling and like aggregating and reselling your data. So a
Mm.
lot of people use some of the free money apps that are available, but the way those apps are making money is by
Mm.
aggregating your data, anonymizing it, and selling it to third parties.
Mm. Okay, that's good to know. In closing, Megan, is there anything else that we left out that you'd like to share?
I think your questions have been so great, Lupe. I think we've really covered all the bases. I just want to thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Oh,
It's been
thank
a
you.
delight.
Oh, thank you,
Thank
Megan.
you.
If someone's listening and wants to work with you, first, how can they reach out? And then what would that look like?
Sure. So my company is called Inkberry Financial. And so my website is inkberryfinancial.com. And the way I work with clients is that I'm available for like a Q&A call, easy call to
Mm.
get more information about what it would look like. But essentially clients who come into the coaching with me, I do a financial wellness plan for them. So they
Mm.
fill out information in advance. I give them a financial wellness plan, which helps them see what they've got. And then they'll also receive detailed recommendations and next action steps.
Mm.
So the idea is that some people just want that meeting. They want to take that document and implement it themselves,
Mm.
DIY, or they can work with me for further coaching and we would
Mm.
work on all of those checklist items together.
Mm.
But I'm
Very
really trying
cool.
to make this accessible to people. I feel that, for example, if my parents had had access to something like
Mm.
this really could have been a game changer for them. They've ended in a really good place, but it was like a roller coaster, for them to get
Mm.
there. And so what I want to do is make this type of information accessible to families and help get them on a path where they can reduce that volatility in life
Mm,
and meet those life milestones with confidence and excitement rather than
mm,
fear around the financial aspect of it.
Recently, Susie Moore is a coach I follow, and she shared something that I thought was really helpful. She said, when we're struggling with something, it's time for a thought upgrade. And one is, I don't have to be perfect. And two, there are plenty of people that can help me. And so I think if someone's out there struggling with finances or trying to understand, there are plenty of people like Megan who can help us. I was in a group with Megan, a women's group this fall. And Megan, just like you hear her today, this is who she is. She's just so warm, genuine, non judgmental. There's no judgment. I felt like I can automatically trust you. Your clients are lucky to work with you. And I can see your passion come through. It came through throughout this interview and during our calls in the women's group. So thank you so much for sharing so much helpful information. I know it's going to be helpful for people.
Lupe, thank you for introducing me to your community. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.